Hello, friends. Welcome to the Mongolian Adventures Podcast, a place for stories about Mongolia for adventurous kids. Get comfortable, snuggle in, and let's begin.
Let's begin.
The morning was bright and sunny, the air still cool on her whiskers. Minjin quite liked her outfit for today. She was wearing her blue and green glitter sneakers and a denim dress with red and yellow rhinestones all over it. In between her soft gray ears, she had a big purple bow on her headband. It was an outfit full of color, perfect for her visit to a place full of color, an art museum. Minjin loved art. She loved colors and designs, patterns and prints. She loved paint and crayons, sharp colored pencils, and soft melty oil pastels. Today might just be the day she found the place that was going to be her home. The mouse entrance was off to the side of the museum, a tiny light green door. The building wasn't as big as the Parliament building had been, but Minjin still felt her stomach fluttering with anticipation. A mouse named Anand met her inside. He wore black-rimmed glasses and a red suit, his shiny black shoes sliding across the brown squares of the floor. As they moved across the museum, Anand showing her the different pieces of artwork, sculptures, and artifacts, he also introduced her to the other mice who worked and lived at the Fine Arts Zanabazar Museum. "This is Sitzin. She's the director of mice education," he said, smiling at a tall mouse wearing a polka dot dress and swingy silver earrings. "Hello, Minjin," Sitzin said, smiling brightly. "How are you finding the museum today?" "It's beautiful," Minjin answered truthfully, looking up at all of the art displayed on the walls and in cases. "What has been your favorite piece so far?" Sitzin asked. Minjin hesitated. She didn't want to sound silly. "I really like the fabric that is hanging up on the walls with the beautiful pictures on them," she answered. "The colors are so bright, and a lot of the pictures look similar to things I saw when I visited the Ganden Monastery." "Oh, yes, the tapestries," Sitzin said. "Those are some of my favorites, too. And you are right. Many of the tapestries here have Buddhist images on them, because Buddhism, of course, has been very important to the history of Mongolia. We would be happy to have you here if you would like to continue learning and sharing about art." Minjin smiled with relief. Maybe she was smart enough to live and work here with all of these beautiful things. She and Anand continued their tour, pausing to look at the art whenever she felt like it. The art was pretty and certainly full of colors and patterns and prints, but it also told a story. She had never thought about art like that before. To her, it had always been about how it looked and if she liked what she saw. But here in the museum, she realized that the pieces and the artwork told a story about the history of Mongolia. It showed what people had been doing and thinking about thousands of years ago and what had been important to them. Through the art, she could get an idea of what their lives had been like and what they had loved. She saw pieces of their clothing, their decorations, the things they used in their lives, like swords and snuff bottles and shoes. Minjin also saw a teapot that had camels' heads as the spouts on both sides. It was the most interesting teapot she'd ever seen. "This museum began in 1966, Anand explained as they walked. "It was named after the famous artist Minjin Zanabazar in 1995. His statues are displayed here. While most of our pieces are from history, we also have an art gallery that shows work from contemporary artists." "What does contemporary mean?" Minjin asked. "Oh, that just means that they live and work now," Anand answered. They finished their tour of the artwork, and Anand took her to the wing of the museum where the mice lived and made their homes. It was the coziest, most fantastic spot she had ever seen. Underneath a staircase in the back of the museum, where humans mostly forgot to go, the mice had built a tiny, perfect apartment building. Each mouse had their own little hole, decorated with their own things, and artwork bursting off the walls. The hallways were full of colorful murals, pictures, and shapes and words covering every inch. There were mice sitting on tiny soft couches talking about art, reading books about art, and eating nibbles of cheese. At the end of each hall there was a studio with big tables and pots full of paint, brushes, clay, and every possible art supply, whittled down to tiny mouse size. "Whoa," Minjin whispered under her breath. This was incredible. "Would you like to make something?" Anand asked. Minjin turned to him with a huge smile on her face. "I would love to." They settled in at one of the tall, perfectly mouse-sized tables, and Minjin walked around the room, gathering the supplies she wanted to use. Anand also chose some paints and paper and sat down next to her. An hour passed before Minjin looked up again. She had used pencils, paints, and gemstones to create a picture of flowers in a field. It was shiny and colorful, the gemstones glued onto the flowers' petals so they sparkled in the light. She felt great about her work. This studio was beautiful. Just think of all of the artwork she could make if she lived here. Then she turned to look at Anand's work next to her. She couldn't help but gasp. It was breathtaking. More beautiful than anything she had ever seen. Clean, perfect lines, soft colors, a portrait of a mountain scene that could have been in the museum they had just walked through. Suddenly, Minjin was embarrassed by her work. She was clearly not a good artist. She had been silly to think she was good enough to be here. She tried to hide her picture before Anand could see it, but he saw her movement and looked over. "Wow, Minjin," he said. "Tell me about your picture." Ugh, her whiskers started to turn pink. She thought she might cry. Well, I wanted to draw some flowers because I like them, and gemstones add sparkle, which I also like, so that's what I did." Anand looked at her thoughtfully. "Are you feeling upset about your work?" Minjin didn't know what to say. "I asked you to tell me about your picture because an artist can never assume they know what someone else has made or what it means." Anand smiled at her. "Art is personal. It's a reflection of the person who made it and the creativity they have. None of us are the same, and our art can't be the same either." "So my art isn't bad?" Minjin asked in a small voice. "Well, a lot of people talk about what makes art good or bad. I would say that art is more about its stories. It isn't useful to say something is good or bad. We want to look at what it means and what story it tells, just like the artwork we saw this morning." "But your picture is so beautiful," Minjin said. "Thank you," Anand answered. "But when I look at your picture, I get to see a part of you. And when you share with me about your picture, I get to know your creativity, your thoughts, and your ideas. Every piece of work we make shows us a piece of ourselves or the person who made it, and that is beautiful." Minjin smiled, her mind thinking about Anand's words. Art wasn't a contest. Art was about sharing and telling about our ideas and stories. She could do that. "I have someone I'd like you to meet," Anand said, motioning her over to a chair and desk where a mouse sat reading a book and taking notes. The mouse looked up from her piles of papers and gave them both a big smile. "Hello, I'm Amina," she said. "I work as a historian here, and I have something I'd like to ask you." Minjin was curious. What could this historian mouse have to ask her? She was a 10-year-old mouse who had barely been anywhere yet. "I know you're at the beginning of your home search. I went on my own quite a few years ago," she said, eyes twinkling. "I loved getting to see a bit of Mongolia and choosing where I wanted to make my home and work. Hopefully you've been having a bit of an adventure so far as well." "Oh, yes, I have," answered Minjin, thinking about all of the new places she had gone and mice she had met so far. "Wonderful," Amina said. I have a bit of a puzzle on my hands here, and I need the help of someone who loves art and will be doing some traveling. Of course, if you decide to stay here, I can find someone else, but I thought I would ask you just in case." "A puzzle?" she asked. "What kind of puzzle?" "Well, I found this corner of a picture in some of our boxes of old artwork that we keep here at the museum. Things that the human often fail to look at because they are so small, but that us mice can keep and protect and use to help us better understand the art and the history of Mongolia. I need someone who can talk to mice in different places and ask them if they know anything about this picture or have any other pieces to it that would help us understand it better." Wow! Minjin leaned in closer to see the scrap. It was big for a mouse, but she could see why it would seem tiny to the humans. It was about the size of her head, and it sort of looked like a corner that had been ripped off a picture. You could see just the hint of some blue and the arm of a person. "I would love to," Minjin replied, not taking long to consider. The Zanabazar Museum was incredible, but she wanted to see more of Mongolia so she could make more art about the places and mice she saw. And now she had a mystery to help solve. "Wonderful," Amina said, tucking the piece of art back into a protective piece of plastic. "I can't give you the actual art because that's against the museum's rules, but I will give you a picture of it that you can show to people when you ask." She pulled a printed picture out from a drawer and handed it to Minjin. "Any information you can bring back to us will help. I look forward to hearing from you." Minjin carefully placed the picture in her bag, said her thank yous to Anand and Amina for the tour and their hospitality, and headed back out to the busy streets. It was funny how sometimes the place you thought would fit you the most didn't end up fitting at all. She loved art, and she had learned a lot about being an artist today. But now she had an art mission, and that seemed just right. An adventure for a mouse who loved sparkles and colors and seeing more. An adventure for her. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Mongolian Adventures podcast. You can find more information about the podcast as well as lesson plans for educators at www.mongolianadventurespodcast.com. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Mongolian Adventures Podcast. And on Twitter, we're at Mongolian ADV Pod. We'd love for you to draw a picture or create artwork based off of today's story. Send us your pictures at mongolian.adventures.podcast@gmail.com, and maybe you'll see it featured on our social media. Until next time!
May your adventures be big and your